Hello. I guess I want to have an intimate little chat with you. If you are a producer who has to look after teams, perhaps the project management side of things, looking at schedules, etc., chances are, no matter how many years you've been doing it, that you have been exposed to Agile, and that perhaps, particularly if you're new, or if you can remember to when you were new, you were sent on an Agile training course. Perhaps to complete the joke, which many of us laugh about, you were sent on an Agile, say, Scrum course, or just an Agile intro course, and when you got back you were told to convert the company to Agile, which we've seen happen. But whatever happened, I think this little intimate chat, I want to cover why you were sent on an Agile course, if you were, and why, when you're in a job interview for production, you're always asked, what do you think about Agile then? And you have to say, oh, well, Agile in the games industry is very difficult to do pure Agile. Obviously we do a hybrid model, a hybrid methodology. And, oh, good, you've mentioned the word hybrid. Good. And I'd just like to give you a little potted history about what's going on. Hopefully give you a bit of background and give you my viewpoint. And then after that, probably in part 2, I want to present to you some help, right? Some sort of scientific help around how do you actually do this stuff? What does it mean to be hybrid? And just how do you do it? So this is going to be more of the chatting, and the next section will be more the practical. So let's start with the Agile Manifesto. And perhaps you remember it, perhaps you've seen it, perhaps you haven't. But if you've done any kind of Agile training course, you would have started with the manifesto, and here it is, right? So let's have a look at it. Interesting picture in the background. Bunch of blokes stood around writing on a whiteboard. Now, the Agile Manifesto was developed in 2001. Agile's been around in various forms since about 1990, okay, as it became clear that the way of doing things in software development wasn't really working. And you have to remember back to 1990, and many of you weren't born then, but in 1990, so I'm told, if you were working in software land, it was very much corporate. It was very much being told what to do by overbearing project managers who didn't know what they were doing. And there was a lot of bad management and bad leadership, and a lot of emphasis on incredibly slow process and too much process, right? Now, what that led to was disruption and rebellion. And these rebel leaders came along and they said, well, okay, let's get together and just talk about this. And it was the time when you had things like extreme programming, if you've heard of that, extreme programming coming along. And there were some really innovative and interesting ideas coming along. And it turned into this, the Manifesto for Agile Software Development. So we are uncovering better ways of developing software by doing it and helping others do it. Through this work, we have come to value individuals and interactions over processes and tools, working software over comprehensive documentation, customer collaboration over contract negotiation, responding to change over following a plan. That is, while there is value in the items on the right, we value the items on the left more. And you can look at that and go, what the hell does that mean? But have a look at some of those people down there, people like Ward Cunningham, Ken Schwaber, Jeff Sutherland, to name a few, who have gone on to have successful careers writing lots of Agile books and doing the rounds on spreading their knowledge and really working very hard to explain what this Agile stuff's all about. Some of them went on, like I think Jeff and Ken went on to form Scrum, right, and talk about Scrum and how Scrum is something you can do within that is Agile. Okay, and we'll come on to Scrum. But let's go back and have a look at this. So what? Well, it's a manifesto. So what does it mean? This manifesto is far more important than, 20 years or so of what came next. Because what came next was a lot of process. If you think about it, what came next were things like Agile, Scrum, and others. And they're about how to do this stuff. Okay, so by necessity, that's a methodology. It's got process. It's got roles, right? It became a little bit of a pyramid scheme in that tools and process and documentation became something which was, which you can now get your hands on and tells you how to be Agile and how to do Agile. Now, of course, it was always going to be like that. But a lot of people would now argue that there's too much of it. And particularly when you look at scaled Agile and how to do Agile at scale, I should say, and some of the solutions that have been proposed, some of these are huge. I mean, SAFe, which is a scaled Agile framework, is basically a pyramid scheme of you need to do courses in it, and you need to employ consultants to come and try and implement it into your company because it's so big, and it's full of hierarchy, and it's full of documentation, and it's full of extra roles, and it's incredibly complicated. Some of it's very useful, some of it isn't. Now, coming back to the Agile Software Development Manifesto then. So individuals and interactions over processes and tools was a direct battle, right? It's a direct inter-battle over the corporations and the way they were doing software development at the time. So it was about the process and it was about the tools. And they were saying, well, no, it's about the individuals and the interactions. It's about individuals working together and the interactions between those individuals and the interactions between all the different roles. And working software over comprehensive documentation was saying if you worked for some of the really big companies, like, let's just say IBM, it really was a case of almost like the NASA, NASA in the 60s and 70s and 80s, where they just had books and books and books and books and books of manuals, right, just up on shelves. And you would have, for every piece of software, incredibly comprehensive documentation. Comprehensive meaning large amounts, not necessarily correct, because the documents were so big. It could be 10 years, right? To make some complex piece of software, it could take 10 years if it was really enormous. And the documentation would be incredible, and not necessarily up to date. And, I kind of touched in that world when I was younger, and I saw that world of documentation when I was a technical writer, and when I did some life science industry work, and it was, again, incredible, like the amount of documentation for everything. And it stops smart people doing what they need to do, which is work on the software and produce working software. So this was a response to that situation. And customer collaboration over contract negotiation. Now, if you know Agile, you know that this is huge, right? For both Agile and product management, customer collaboration. The idea that you could have a cadenced approach to software development in which you are presenting to the customer is massive, right? Because the customer used to be someone who would say, I need you to make something, and literally 2 years later, they would get to see what it was they were going to receive, right? Now, that might seem incredible now, but back then, that's just the way it was. These huge teams would go off and write some software and come up with something or other, and the customer would go, wow, that's really not what I expected. And why is that? It's because they were given... they gave, I should say, and paid for an idea that they wanted. And then all these clever people went and did this analysis and wrote all this stuff up and wrote all this documentation and planned all these things and thought they knew what they were doing. But when the years go by, you can pretty much guarantee that what comes out at the other end isn't what they actually did want. So customer collaboration was about, like, can we just talk to the people and find out what they want, so we stop wasting all this money and all this time and all these people's lives. Like, let's just and code. Let's just do it properly. Let's talk to them. So you can see that's really heavily embedded in Agile, and it says over contract negotiation, and it's because, back in the day it would be like, a 2-year contract or a 4-year contract or whatever. Got a massive piece of negotiation there about exactly detail by detail what you were going to get in advance. So you didn't even know if you could do it, but you'd have to try and deliver it because there was a contract. An Agile contract is very different. An Agile contract actually never really, I don't think it ever really took off, right? But an Agile contract was supposed to be, you agree that we are an Agile team, and as an Agile team, we're going to work together with you over the backlog and prioritization, and our product owner will partner up with you, and it was tied into customer collaboration, right? And it was the idea that you could fund the next period of time in the form of cadence. So you could say, we're going to fund the next sprint, we're going to fund the next, or maybe if it was more scaled up and it was a program increment, you'd say, I'm going to sponsor the next program increment, and that would be part of the contract. So rather than saying we're going to pay for a piece of software to be delivered in 18 months, you say we are going to be part of this collaboration process, and that's how the funding will work. And there's quite a lot of this in, say, scaled Agile, which has got a lot of lean principles in it, and there's a whole section about lean accounting, which is really quite interesting to see this kind of thing about we're going to pay for the next bit, right? Responding to change over following a plan. Well, I mean, I've already been talking about this, right? But more fundamentally, this is about, because you planned something 2 years ago, it doesn't mean to say that that's still relevant. You might need to explore what you have discovered and explore what that means, and explore if the customer would like to take advantage of what you have discovered, good or bad, and that can change the plan. So, and there's been so many like cartoons and memes that have been come out of this, right? This stuff about, you've probably seen the one about, the bikes and cars and whatever, how they've been developed, and anyway, there's loads of them. But the whole idea there is that if you can't respond to change, and it's just all a black box that you can't get anywhere near, the customer's going to get something that's rubbish. And this was so true, right? And back in the day, it was, and in fact today, when people aren't doing this kind of approach, you'll see, particularly in some of the government initiatives, huge amounts of money being tossed away, and huge amounts of people's time being tossed away, because there is no customer collaboration and no chance to respond to change, because it's so heavily documented and processed and so heavily managed, right? So these guys came along and said, sod that. It doesn't work. Now, by the way, I've given you a very potted view of this. I mean, if any of these people listen to me, they'd be like, oh my God, is that it? Is that all you can say? No, I could say a lot more, but that's enough. Okay, that's what you need to know for now, in my opinion. So let's apply this to the games industry. So, of course, if you look at what this favors, it favors discovery and exploration. It favors looking at working software being produced very quickly. Okay, it favors, if you map this against some of the extreme programming and TDD, like test-driven development, stuff like that came along around then, it very much favors what became the CI/CD stuff. So I'm going to technically call it stuff, which is your continuous integration and continuous deployment, right? It's the idea that rather than going off and branching off a bit of code and working on something for a year and then trying to put it back into the main branch, you are constantly attempting, as a best practice, you're constantly attempting to get things out as quickly as possible, right? and you're constantly attempting to have working software constantly, so that you always know that what you are all working on actually works. Now, that is something which was, again, a direct reflection of something that was happening at the time, which is where people would be working in extremely remote locations, and then you'd only see what they were working on months later and go, what the hell is that? That's not what we asked for. We can't plug that in. The rest of us have been working on something completely different. Now, if we look at here, we've got 12 principles of agile software, which, is a bit like a poem. We follow these principles, okay? So our highest priority is to satisfy the customer through early and continuous delivery of valuable software. Continuous delivery, you see? Now, continuous delivery is very hard. Well, back then it was, because continuous delivery, you need to actually be working on your software in the right way and have it supported by the right tools, etc., and people, that it can do that. So we have things like, we'll just switch over, so stuff like JetBrains, right, which has got automation, huge amounts of automation to help you, so that you don't have to do everything manually and you can reach this point of CI/CD, right? And it's got a whole, here you go, out of the box, on the fly test reporting, parallel execution, local reproducibility, with coverage for major technical stacks like Gradle and Docker. And it's why, if you look at things like Atlassian, they might have started off with Confluence and Jira, etc., but they swiftly expanded to encompass CI/CD tools and to encompass all this kind of stuff that you would need for release management and things like this. And so, I think as producers, sometimes you're kind of not really part of this puzzle, are you? You're not really exposed to the CI/CD stuff, and you know what deployments are, but you're not really exposed to the sort of engineering perspective of why they're so important, that deployments are handled in a certain way that is part of this CI/CD best practice. And I think we'll come back to this, but it's interesting, right? It's interesting to think, well, okay, I can see why we do things like this and why these could be interesting for game development, and I can see where they came from. But are we actually doing that here? Are we actually doing that? And let's look at this one. Welcome changing requirements, even late in development. Okay. So why do they do that? It's because things do change. Requirements do change, and information produces change. So in game development, we work on, especially in the early part of game development, we're really looking at a lot of things changing, a lot of new information as we try things out, right? We are discovering, we're finding the fun, and finding the fun is difficult. So as you find that fun and you can narrow things down and less is changing, something like Agile professes, in the manifesto anyway, and these principles, professes to support that. So it's an attractive methodology, isn't it? It's attractive to you. You can go, okay, yeah, good, I need that. I need to be able to support changing requirements, because in the games industry, it changes all the time. And deliver working software frequently. This, I would argue that a lot of companies do not support this in the games industry, that they support, they still go for the we'll put things together every now and then approach, as opposed to we will be able to deliver working software, almost daily, right? And particularly with, say, mobile apps and things like this, they can chuck stuff, and not just mobile apps, but a lot of the what would call themselves apps these days that you can get to on like websites or whatever, thousands, millions of them, but they are pretty much built on this CI/CD principle that they can just chuck in a change and get it out live immediately. Now you think about games aren't really yet, or a lot of the bigger games anyway, and they're not really set up to be like that. They're not really set up that you can go click a finger, let's see what the game looks like. because you'll have multiple teams in multiple locations on multiple departments going, well, hang on, we're still working on a whole bunch of stuff. We're working in full production mode. You can't just click your finger and see what the game looks like right now. You can see what an element of the game looks like, but not a completely working piece of software. And if you want to call your game software, right? So business people and developers must work together daily throughout the project. Okay. And of course, business people and developers became very much like the product owner and the development team working together daily, and then with the product owner having the relationship with the customer. And build projects around motivated individuals, give them the environment and support they need, and trust them to get the job done. And this is huge, right? Because this isn't a process, this is a principle. So in your team, do you have highly motivated individuals? Are you giving them a supportive environment so that they can get on and solve problems? Or are you telling them what to do? Because telling them what to do is what happened up until the 90s and 2000s. That's what was happening, which drove these guys to come up with the Agile Manifesto. So I see a lot of us still telling people what they're supposed to be doing, as opposed to letting them get on with it. And we'll come back to that because we're going to go into more detail on Scrum. The most efficient and effective method of conveying information to and within the development team is face-to-face conversation. Of course it is, right? Of course it is. And a lot of these people were used to being shut off in little cubicles, like one cubicle, not talking to anybody in these large offices. Now, that flipped on its head, and then we had about 20 years of open plan office, where everybody was told the most brilliant way of organizing an office was open plan. Now, recently, people have gone, oh, no, it isn't. No, we were wrong. Actually, the most efficient and effective method is cubicles of like 3 to 4 people. So if you can get 3 to 4 engineers working together in a little cubicle, actually, that team like that is incredibly effective. And it's because, guess what? People working on complex and complicated problems need a bit of peace and quiet. And every time you interrupt them, bam, they lose their concentration. And it can take them 30 minutes to get back into the mode of where they were, because what they're doing is incredibly hard. Anyway, that's a bit too much. Here we have the development team is face-to-face conversation, and you can see that what happened there was that you ended up with this, as we'll see in Scrum, like these ceremonies for things like daily stand-ups, which were supposed to be like standing up in a room having face-to-face conversations, and of course the planning ceremonies and retros and things like this, all supposed to be face-to-face. And this thing about face-to-face became a best practice for Agile, in which remote work and work across different time zones would have been really frowned upon back then. This was all about you should be co-located, right? Meaning that you should all be in the same place and you should all be able to talk to each other, because it reduces hugely confusion, the cost of trying to get people together, the speed that you can do it at, the being able to turn around and say, hey, bang, can you help me with this? And is this what you meant by that? Okay, that's incredibly efficient and effective, right? There's no argument about that. But so many of us now have to work in a remote environment. So this has become really hard. Working software is the primary measure of progress. Well, it has to be, right? Because that's what you're there for. Working software. Not broken software, not a feature which hasn't been put into the software, but it's finished, according to you, but working software. Stuff that has to work. And that's the only way you know if you've made any progress, right? And this is why, say, every 2 weeks with the Scrum teams, they'll try and get that working software in front of the product owner, the customer, and say, here you go, working software. Here it is. This is what we've done. And if you can't show it as working software, it's not done. Agile processes promote sustainable development. The sponsors, developers, and users should be able to maintain a constant pace indefinitely. Crunch culture, anyone? A constant pace. It doesn't say a 100% burnout, does it? This is a constant pace. You should probably know that the optimum capacity for people is about 80%. That's science, and we'll cover that in the second part, science. But 80%, right? That's sustainable. It's not just sustainable, it's effective, it's efficient, it's scientific. The constant pace, if you think about it, with Agile, particularly with Scrum and Cadence, if you think about it, there's that loop, right? The loop is sustainable. The loop promotes sustainability, and it also promotes learning. It promotes talking to each other. It promotes sharing. It promotes so many things, all of which is that human contact, which knowledge workers love so much. So there's a lot going for it. Continuous attention to technical excellence and good design enhances agility. Damn straight, right? Technical excellence. Why? Because if you have technical excellence, not only are you encouraging people to stick together and mentor and learn and do all the right things and keep up to date with what's going on out there and bring that back in, but you're also looking at technical debt being reduced, because that technical investment's happening, the tech debt goes away to a degree too. So rather than building up huge amounts of tech debt through just doing lazy stuff or rushing into something and not being allowed the continuous attention, you can do it properly, and that will pay dividends. Good design enhances agility. Of course it does. Simplicity, the art of maximizing the amount of work not done, is essential, right? So, and this is massive again. In product management, this thing about outcome and output. They'll say, outcome over output, meaning it doesn't matter how much you try and do. What matters is that you're doing the right things, and you're doing the right things properly. So you can put out 100 features, and I'm sure you can think of examples where your favorite applications, they've just put so many features in that you can go away and come back and go, what the hell have you done to this? It was so easy to use, but over the last 3 years, you've added 30 features that no one wants. And it's that kind of stuff, right? And that's back to the good design enhancing agility thing as well. You got to combine the good design with the simplicity. Best architectures, requirements, and designs emerge from self-organizing teams. Now, there's a lot in that, right? And I'm not gonna lift the lid on that one too much. There's a lot in that, but let's just say self-organizing teams. Let's just look at that bit. Self-organizing team isn't a team that is a cross-discipline team that you've thrown together of 5 people and you give them a backlog, right? That isn't a self-organizing team. That's just a bunch of people that you've thrown together and given work to do. A self-organizing team, in the perfect world, there's a bucket of people and they can self-organize themselves into teams. They can say, right, you guys, we're going to form a team because we have a problem to solve, and we're the best people to solve that problem or those problems. And let's go. And from that self-organizing team, they're actually putting together the best ways of solving the problems and the best solutions. And they're self-motivated, right? They're doing the architectures, the requirements, the designs, etc. Does that happen in your company with your teams? I probably doubt it, right? Probably not. And it's much easier for that to happen where these guys come from, right? Their history is they're going to be coming from organizations of thousands of developers, engineers, programmers, coders, whatever you call them, right? Thousands of them in multiple huge buildings. It's not unusual to read about these people talking about teams of 2,000, right? So there was a bucket of experts there that could pick and choose and put teams together and solve problems depending upon the overall problem or I should say, the overall customer requirements. At regular intervals, the team reflects on how to become more effective, then tunes and adjusts its behaviour accordingly. I think we can safely say retrospective here, can't we? But that retrospective, you see the way it's phrased here, it's very much that the team reflects. The team has the time to reflect. The team has the opportunity to reflect. The team has the support to reflect and improve. It's continuous improvement, right? Which is a lean principle, by the way. I mean, it's taken as a lean principle, but it's right there, right? Continuous improvement. It's how do we get better? And we're going to get support to get better. So there's a lot here. There's a lot in these principles, okay? And they are principles. They're not processes, they're principles. And it's important because individual interactions over processes and tools, okay? Now, there we are. We've looked a bit at that. And I think through my conversation, you can probably tell that I feel it's questionable how much of this can be applied to the games industry and game development, because games development is not software development, right? There's a big difference, isn't there? Because pure software development tends to say, right, we have a customer, or we're working for a company and we make particular things. So say we're Microsoft, right? We're Microsoft and we let's say Office, and it's now Office 365, right, or whatever it's called now, and that's what we do. We make Office, and Office is huge, vast, ambitious. It ties together hundreds of different things. Hundreds of different platforms and solutions and whatever. And it's all these multiple products, right? It's not one product, it's multiple products. And this is where this world here really helps, right? So you can see how this huge complexity of teams working together, etc. But it's all based around producing products. And a lot of it is known. A lot of it is we have a lot of products out there, and we need to keep them going, and we need to improve, and we need to all come together and work together and talk to each other. And our customers can be internal customers, right, in the case of something like, say, Office, as well as external customers. And that's the kind of world where you can see this sort of thing working really well, because you're dealing with some incredibly clever engineers and tens of thousands of them, right? And so the whole environment is pretty much set up for that. Just like you can see this working pretty well for a small team. So if there's like 8 or 9 people and they're having to produce a product, and that product is their company, their future, and they use these kind of principles, then you can say, well, yeah, actually, that could work really well. Or if they're a small couple of team size and they do work for others, right? They have external customers and they produce, say, apps for them or something like that, right? And you can go, yeah, okay, I can see this would be really cool for that. But if you're looking at a game, we are heavily skewed in game development because we're skewed towards discovery. We're skewed towards the discovery phase, the what's going to work and what isn't going to work. What are we going to need to throw away, right? It's like it's a very different thing to create, say, a board game, right? Or a video game, or anything which needs you to explore at the beginning. Not to explore to say, can we code this? Can we work out how to code this? But what the hell is it that you can put together that actually works and is something which is going to be incredible? And it could be that it's a particular mechanic that defines your game, and you all swarm around that mechanic and go, got it, nailed it. This is a brilliant mechanic. We're going to design around this. And it could be that you're looking at, say, I don't know, just let's face it, it's the games industry, right? There's a million ideas. And those ideas, depending upon the scale of what you're doing, they demand a lot of change, and they demand that you fail fast. and they demand that you find the fun, and they demand that you get people working together from different disciplines quickly, and that you can mix all of that up and move it all around. And it's a really difficult and interesting challenge. Now, if we look at Scrum, which we will, you can see Jeff and Ken were back at the manifesto, right? They were back then. Now, Scrum. So what's Scrum? Now, you've probably worked within Scrum. You've probably done some training in Scrum, I imagine. And a lot of people think Scrum is Agile and Agile is Scrum. Now, you can see Agile is actually, it's got a manifesto, right? It's got some principles. Scrum is a framework, okay? Scrum is actually a much lighter framework than most people think. Most people add a huge amount of assumptions to Scrum, but actually Scrum's pretty simple, pretty straightforward, right? It's got some roles, it's got some events, it's got some artifacts, and it's got some rules to bind them together, as it says there, okay? And we can have a look at those. We can just have a look. So I'm not going to go through all of this in a huge amount of detail, but you can see, right, that Scrum sits within this Agile world. Scrum says, okay, so, it means Scrum, like early 1990s, right? So it's been around since before the Agile Manifesto, and that goes, that's just because things have been developing. And the manifesto was the first time that they actually just put it all together and stood behind it and went, hey. And here, they're going to stand behind Scrum. So what is Scrum? Scrum is the rugby term of people coming together and we're trying to move a ball by all moving it together, right? So, okay, that's fine. There's, bam, got it. People working together, got it. So what is it? How does Scrum work? So Scrum is defined in this way, right? So it's defined by saying it's a light work framework, helps people teams and organizations generate value through adaptive solutions for complex problems. Now, we know that Agile Scrum is great for complex problems. Is games development a complex problem? I guess it is, right? Let's start with, yeah, sure. Games development can be a complex problem. Okay, great. Let's carry on. At least let's just remember it that though, right? Complex problems. Okay. Is games development always complex problems? Well, at the beginning, there's a lot of complex problems. But what about when you hit full production? Is your art team facing complex problems? Not really, right? Your art team is facing a huge amount of work that's very predictable. What about your level design people? Are they facing complex problems? Well, they were, but now they're not really complex problems. They've just got some complex opportunities, right? They've got a whole bunch of stuff that they could do for a level, and they need to work out how to do it best and how it's going to be the best level. So is that a complex problem? Not really. So there comes a point in game development where you say, well, we don't really have any complex problems, do we? Not really, not now. We've handled that. So should we do Scrum still? And let's just bear that in mind, right, and come back to that. So you want a Scrum Master to foster an environment where a product owner orders the work for a complex problem into a product backlog. The Scrum team turns the selection of work into an increment of value during a sprint, and the Scrum team and its stakeholders inspect the results and adjust for the next sprint. Repeat. Easy, right? What could be easier? And in fact, when people first started this, and even to a degree when they're doing it now, it works fine because it's pretty simple. You've got a product owner, you've got a Scrum Master, you've got a Scrum team, and you've got a sprint, which is cadenced. And, I'm not going to go into all the details here because you should know this really. And nearly everybody, right, will know this off by heart probably. But Scrum, there's a lot going for it, right? There's a lot going for it about, like it says there, it's founded on empiricism and lean thinking, right? Lean thinking reduces waste and focuses on the essentials, okay? Scrum employs an iterative, incremental approach. What does that mean? Well, to iterate and increment. So iterate means do a little bit at a time, right? And that's very scientific, because scientifically it's proven that you should be working on smaller pieces of work at a time. You should iterate, and that you should be able to, not just that, but you should be able to reflect and learn from what you are doing and use the information that's being produced through the work that you're doing. So you can iterate a little bit at a time, do that cycle, and incremental. So again, increment, bam, 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 right? Iterate, increment, iterate, increment. Iterative and incremental is where the cadence comes from, and it's where the small gains can happen. And because they're small gains that go in front of the customer and the product owner, it means that you can't go too far wrong, right? You can't make something that's completely wrong, because probably in up to 2 weeks' time, you're going to present it to somebody, which is why it optimizes predictability and controls risk as well, right? To a degree. So these groups of people come together, collectively have all the skills and expertise to do the work. Sounds like a cross-departmental team to me, right? Scrum combines 4 formal events. Now, you already know what they are, hopefully, but we'll come down to them. Transparency, so the work's visible, okay, which means it can be inspected. That's good. So inspection. All right, well, that's good, isn't it? You can go and have a look at what's going on. That's okay, cool. Adaptation. So adaptation. So this means that the team can adapt to new information. So if things change, they can adapt themselves. They're self-empowering. Scrum values. Successful use of Scrum depends on people becoming more proficient in living 5 values: commitment, focus, openness, respect, and courage. Well, they sound good, don't they? Wow. Okay, that's cool. I once had these up on a poster on my wall, and when I was working remotely, and I would just keep looking at it and think about it a lot when I was talking to the teams and working with them. But, I'll leave it to you, right? I'm not going to deep dive into those ones right now. Let's look at the team. So we got a team, right? Scrum team. It consists of a Scrum Master, a product owner, and developers. Okay. So does that sound familiar? Is that what you've got? Okay. Are you the Scrum Master by any chance? Right. Okay. Do you have a product owner? Or are you the product owner? Or maybe a member of the design team is a product owner, right? Maybe the design leads are product owners. Maybe. Could be. So maybe you don't have any product owners. Maybe you kind of go, yeah, it's not really important that we have product owners. We've got, and we don't really have a Scrum Master. We have me, the producer. So basically we have developers. Oh, right. Okay. Well, you're not Scrum then, are you? Because the fundamental unit of Scrum is a Scrum team of a Scrum Master, a product owner, and developers. And if you don't have those roles, you're not doing Scrum, because this is the bare minimum. Okay. They are cross-functional. Hooray. Because most Scrum teams are cross-functional. However, if you're using Scrum for, say, your engineering backlog, and you've got a bunch of engineers and they're all working on an engineering backlog, is that cross-functional? Probably, right? Because they've got all the skills necessary to create value. Okay, that's good. So it probably works. The Scrum, but we'll come back to it. The Scrum team. Okay, small enough to remain nimble. I've seen Scrum teams of 20 people. That's not small enough. They need to be cut up, right? So, yeah. And they can share the same product goal, product backlog, and product owner if you cut those teams up. Okay. The Scrum team is responsible for all product-related activities, from stakeholder collaboration, verification, maintenance, operation, experimentation, research, development. Is that true in game development? It's very difficult, right? It's a very difficult world to say, well, yeah, the Scrum team is definitely responsible for operation. It's definitely responsible for research and development and stakeholder collaboration. It's probably not. It's probably responsible for a bit of those things. But in game development, there's so much cross-pollination and so much accountability in the world, in some of the more senior roles, that it's very difficult to see that a Scrum team can have ownership over all this stuff, right? So I would be surprised, unless you're a very small team, The bigger you get, the more difficult this becomes. So developers, right? It says here, developers, that the developer is always accountable for creating a plan for the sprint, right? The sprint backlog. Instilling quality by adhering to a definition of done. Adapting their plan each day towards a sprint goal. Holding each other accountable as professionals. I bet you that in your world, nearly everything there is not done by your team. I bet you that the fourth one is, right? But I bet you that these three are not. And the reason I say that is because nearly everybody I've ever talked to say, we don't even know what definition of done is. We've never had to do a definition of done. And then the producers go, Christ, if only we'd done a definition of done, because they did all this work, but they haven't finished. And they didn't know they hadn't finished because we haven't got a definition of done. Well, do a definition of done then, right? If you need to know what a definition of done is, look it up. Because it's the only way you're going to get things finished at the right quality. Creating a plan for the sprint backlog. You got a backlog? Cool. Okay, who did it? Who made that backlog? Was it you, the producer, or was it the team? Was it the self-aware team who did it? Maybe it was, right? Maybe it was their so-called lead or boss that did it for them. Maybe you're at a phase now where the sprint backlog is simply a list of things they need to make, right? So if you're in full production and you're hammering out thousands of assets, then the sprint backlog will be some of that. Adapting their plan each day towards the sprint goal. I mean, again, that sounds really good, right? It's like a self-motivated team going, yeah, let's adapt our plan. Do you have a sprint goal, or is the concept of a sprint goal something you've never ever done? Right? If you have a sprint goal, what is it? Are they adapting their plan towards it? Are you having a discussion in your stand-ups about it? Are you saying, right, here's what I'm doing towards the sprint goal today, and here's where I need help? Is that what is happening in your stand-ups? Because that's what it's supposed to be. And if that's not what it is, if your stand-ups are 20 people in a room saying, yeah, I've done half a day's work, I think I've got another 2 days to go on it. Yeah, I know I said it would be 1 day, but I think it's going to be 2 days. Yeah, I don't think there's anything I can do about that. If that's what your stand-ups are, that is not what they should be. That's not what they're supposed to be. That's not what you're there to do, right? And by the way, I'm assuming that you're there as some kind of product owner come Scrum Master. Product owner. What does a product owner do? Do you have one? So a product owner, right? Accountable for effective product backlog management. So you're supposed to communicate the product goal. Do you have one? Do you have a product goal? Create and clearly communicate product backlog items. Okay. So if you've got user stories, if you've got epics, etc., you've got to be able to create and clearly communicate those between the team and the customer. Who's the customer, by the way, in game development? Is it your boss? Is it the EP? Who is it? Who's your customer? It's not the gamer, is it? It's not the person. It's not the one who's going to be playing the game, or is it? Because once the game's gone live, or as you get near to user tests, customer does become that person, don't they? You'll have a bunch of design team members going, we've got loads of feedback, we're going to have to make loads of changes, rushing in right from a daily session, and you'll be like, whoa, hang on. Since when did the gamers become the customer? Just then. That's when. Just then. Now, if you're working in mobile, it could be that your customers are with you far quicker. It could be that your users, your customers, your gamers are there, within months, right? Not within years. So you got to be aware that your customers can change pretty fast. Your product goal, your product backlog items, right? The ordering of those items, that is supposed to be a negotiation out of respect between the development team and the customer and the product owner. Now, I would argue that often it's not. Often the producer just says, do this next. But it shouldn't be like that. Ensuring that the product backlog is transparent, visible, and understood. Again, good luck with that, because the busier you become, the harder it is to make that thing happen. And in fact, the product backlog can get wildly out of control. And if you've even got one, right? But if you want to do Scrum, that's what you need, okay? And the product owner, by the way, is very different from a product manager. So if you think product owners and product managers are the same, you are very, very wrong. Product management is its own discipline. It has hundreds of books and courses and coaches and whatever, right? Product management is huge, and it's not about product ownership, right? I got a book just over here by a guy called Roman Pilcher, I think, who is writing a book about Agile for product managers, and it basically says you're a product manager. That means that you're way more than a product owner, but here's what you need to know about product ownership. Okay, so I'm just throwing that in there because some people find that confusing. Scrum Master, possibly you were told you're the Scrum Master. Now, Scrum Masters, here we are, true leaders who serve the Scrum team in larger organization. Cool. So it makes sense, right, that you'd be the one, if that's you, of being told to make the whole company agile, apart from you can't because you haven't been given the support or the training. But, maybe you're comfortable helping your teams become more agile and you're helping them understand Scrum, okay? But have a look at this. You serve the Scrum team, you serve the product owner, you serve the organization in this huge list. And a lot of this is actually core production stuff. Some of it isn't. Helping the Scrum team focus on creating high-value increments that meet the definition of done. That's what the Scrum Master does, right? And including a whole bunch of other things too. And some of it is negotiation, some of it is facilitation, some of it is training, some of it is removing barriers. But there's a big list there. Scrum events. So we know that there are these events and they produce or are influenced by artifacts, and the artifacts are just things you produce, right? So the sprint itself, great. You know what that is, right? Do you? Because maybe you don't. But as a sprint, it's not just 2 weeks or 3 weeks or 4 weeks that go by and then you have another one, right? That's not a sprint. A sprint has some goals, right? You're supposed to achieve things. The sprint goal. And that sprint goal builds towards the product goal. And that sprint goal is something that should be written for the next period and agreed by the team, okay? And it needs a great refined product backlog as well. So your sprints have these events within them. For example, sprint planning. So sprint planning, sprint planning, a lot of people are like, that needs to be a whole day, right? And you're like, well, that's never going to happen here. There's no way you're going to have a day or a half day. Sprint planning is going to be here. In my company, sprint planning is, let's say, a couple of the leads get together and decide what's going to happen next. Or there's no planning at all. There's no single event which is planning. We don't do it. We simply just keep adding things to the backlog and telling people what it is that we need next. Or just tell the producer, right, we're going to need this feature worked on, not this one. Go and sort it out. And then they're going to have to sort it out. It's not Scrum, is it? It's not even Agile. It's just management. So you need to be really aware of that. Because again, just because you say you're doing Agile Scrum or Agile doesn't mean you are, right? Agile is about principles, not about process. And this Scrum framework here is like the minimum process that it thinks you can get away with, right? So if you're not even doing this, you're definitely not doing Scrum either. So what can be done in the sprint? How will the chosen work get done, right? So that's what sprint planning is looking at. Why is the sprint valuable, of course, at the top, right? There's a lot going on there. And if you do it properly, the planning, then it saves an enormous amount of waste. And it sets in motion effective working days, happy people, getting the work done, not burning out, being sustainable, all that stuff, right? All that stuff that we read about. If you don't do the sprint planning properly, if you don't take it seriously, and you just go, well, we just can't do that here, right? It's never going to happen. You're not Agile, are you? You're not doing Agile and you're not doing Scrum. So maybe you can't, right? Maybe it's not, maybe it just, there's no point. In which case, that's all right. It's not a criticism, but just don't think you're doing a thing, because you're not. Daily Scrum, okay? We've already covered daily Scrum. You stand up and do what I said earlier, right? But they can talk outside of the daily Scrum. The people on the team, they can chat to each other whenever they want, right? Daily Scrum is just like focusing on a certain thing, right? And particularly, it's like, this is what I'm doing towards the sprint goal, and this is where I need some help being unblocked. And that, it's a great time to do that, right? Sprint review, or particularly, by the way, fully remote. Sprint review. So, okay, let's do a sprint review. The Scrum team says, right, we finished this stuff and we have working software and we're going to show it to you. Now, it's not always working software, right? Sometimes it's going to be internal stuff or back end things, and you can kind of talk through the definition done, the success criteria that were attached to that, and you can say, all right, here you go. This is how we know that you should accept this because we've got this criteria and we can tick these boxes, right? But do you do that? Do you have a cadenced sprint review in which the outcome of the sprint's inspected? I would argue most people don't. Maybe you don't have to, but most people don't. And what they do probably have is maybe once a month. I know this is going to change, right? Depending, but maybe once a month, a bunch of the senior leadership come together and do a build review. They go, right, let's review the game. Right, let's have a look. And maybe some of the leads present it and they say, here's the situation, here's what's going on. And you get some feedback and blah, blah, blah. It might be that it happens far faster, right? You might have a creative director who sits in there and goes, fuck the sprint review. I'm going to review every hour. I'm going to be giving you feedback and everything every hour, right? Does that fit into a Scrum plan where you have a single team that's self-sufficient and you're not allowed to change the sprint goal, but you can react to change and new information? Possibly. Depends how it's worked through, right? Is that a massive disruption, or is it just great because you can accept change, right? Because actually you can accept change, but you're not supposed to accept change every hour, because science will tell you that the disruption cost is huge. People need to be able to be left alone to do things for a while. And if they're used to just having noise, then it's really bad, okay? So sometimes you'll need to put a process around that to protect your team. Sprint retrospectives. So I don't hear a lot of sprint retrospectives being regularly accomplished, say every 2 weeks or 3 weeks or whatever. I don't hear a lot of that happening. Okay, now maybe you do. Maybe you have a sprint retrospective every few weeks at the end of your before you start planning the next one, and you take it really seriously, and you use, say, I don't know, the Atlassian template for retrospectives, or maybe you've got some of those retrospective games, or you take it really seriously and you've done all the research and it's all brilliant, and good for you, right? If that works for you. But most people I know go, yeah, we don't do the retrospectives because what's the point? We don't even do planning properly, right? What the hell's the point of doing a retrospective? Anyway, we're too busy. We're not going to improve anything, right? We can't. We're too busy. Nose to the grindstone, like, screw what's wrong, let's get on with it before everyone has a nervous breakdown. Now, it might not be that bad where you are, and alternatively, I've heard quite a lot of this sort of thing where instead of a sprint retro, you go, well, we're going to do a full retro on that feature and what went wrong, or that initiative and what went wrong, right? We're gonna after the game's finished, we're going to do a massive retrospective on that. Or, a particularly large initiative, let's say, which was a distraction from the main game, or, and we're going to do a retro. Well, okay, but that's not a sprint retro, right? It's not continuous improvement. It's not saying how can we become more effective as a team working together. It's a project retrospective. So that's got nothing to do with this. Scrum artifacts. So artifacts, they're just things that have been produced, okay, an artifact. It sounds much more exciting than it really is. So it's the product goal for the product backlog, right? Each artifact contains a commitment to ensure it provides information that enhances transparency and focus against which progress can be measured. For the product backlog, it's the product goal. For the sprint backlog, it's the sprint goal. And for the increment, it's the definition of done, okay? If you don't have those, you're not doing Scrum, okay? Now, the backlog. So, the backlog, if you go to, let's say you use Jira for your project management, and you go and you're using the Scrum template, and you've got a backlog there, and you assign stuff from the backlog and you move it into your next sprint, and you go, here you go, that's what we're going to try and do next sprint. A lot of producers simply move stuff in there because they've had a conversation with a bunch of people who've said, oh yeah, we can do that stuff. And they just chuck it in, right? That's not what's supposed to happen, is it? In a planning session, you're supposed to have, it's supposed to be an agreement amongst the team. And hopefully that's what you do, right? Hopefully you have the team come together and go, right, we're going to try and do these things. Let's commit to this. But that commitment of work is really interesting because it doesn't happen much. And I think there's a good reason it doesn't happen much, which is most people don't have a clue how much they can commit. They just don't know. Because, again, in the games industry, particularly at certain phases of making a game, you have no clue how long something's going to take. So if you're being told, oh, you have to put something inside a sprint and we need to break it down so it fits inside this sprint time period, and what you're talking about is going to cross over into the next sprint, so we can't do it. So I need to split that work into something smaller. And they're like, well, hang on, I don't know how long it's going to take me to successfully find the fun for this particular bunch of stuff working together. I don't know. But I know I have to do it in the next, say, 3 weeks. So I'll let you know at the end of the next week or two. How's it going? And then they're like, oh no, well, you can't do that because it's going to go over into the next sprint. So I'm going to have to break it down into another item. And you're like, mate, just stop talking aloud. Go and do that by yourself, right? Just go and do it. Don't talk about it. Support the person. You're like, yeah, of course. Right? Because you know what? You're not in a normal Scrum development life cycle, are you? You're in discovery. And the discovery phase, there's a lot written about it, right? The discovery phase and the design phases and some of the crossover between those things, you can look them up. There's quite a lot of research about how to do this stuff, particularly came from, say, UX and that kind of stuff, these sort of disciplines where there was a lot of work to be done before software teams just got on with it, right? There's a lot of discovery work, a lot of design work that needs to be done at the beginning, which is probably a lot more appropriate to what we do with games, right? Than just saying, right, well, we'll have the first sprint as sprint 0, and it'll be where we just get our shit together. And by sprint 1, we're just going to get on with it. Okay, you can try that. So the sprint backlog, you need a sprint goal, right, for each one. And systems like Jira, they do support that. You can say, here's the sprint goal, and you can put it in there. Increments. Well, I'm not going to go into this. Definitions of done, right? Have you got definitions of done? Because your product backlog item needs one. Or how do you know that you finish? And this is huge. And I hear this a lot from producers. When we're working on games together and they're like, we haven't done, I'm trying to get the definition of done off person X, but they haven't got time to give it to me, but we're working on it and we think we've done it. And then a week goes by and they're like, oh, it turns out it was a completely different thing that they wanted, right? We didn't, because they're just so busy. Now, arguably, you could go, well, that's life. Or you could say that if you had done it properly and you'd had a proper planning session, the person X would have had to have been in that planning session, giving you the definition of done, which you could then say, yeah, okay, get it. Because the whole point of the planning session with the whole team there is they can ask the questions. They can say, we don't quite understand. Can you help us with this? Great. Okay, let's update our definition of done. If you haven't got a definition of done, it's very difficult to make anything. Now, there you go. Right? That's essentially Scrum. Notice there are certain things we haven't talked about. Right? We haven't talked about story points, for example. Oh, should we use story points? Scrum doesn't care. Do whatever you like. Now, that might surprise you. You might go, hang on, we've got to use, estimates is, well, just like user stories and epics, right? Is that mentioned here? No, it's not. Do whatever you like. You can do whatever works for you, right? You don't have to use that hierarchy. It's just that hierarchy is quite popular. And in some cases, it's hard coded in. Like if you use Jira, you have to use a certain hierarchy, even though some of it's flexible, some of it isn't. So, there's Scrum, right? And game development, the reason that hybrid comes up when you're talking about methodologies is because game development changes. Game development matures as the game matures. And I'm sorry, not game development matures. I should say that the game making process matures. The concrete begins to set, right? The foundations begin to be laid. The changes become fewer, because you're learning what works and what doesn't work in your game. And as you can commit to stuff, you can start handing it over and saying, we're sure about this bit, let's go. Right? We're sure about that bit, let's go. We're not sure about this bit though. And then one of your major jobs, one of the major pieces of your skills, and the skills of your communications, of being able to collaborate and talk to the right people and listen and bring things up, is to pull all that together and say, well, if that's set in stone and that isn't set in stone, where does that leave us? What can we really do? And what's too risky to get on with? And where are we still blocked? And where are the dependencies? Right? And that's so important. Is there anything here about dependencies? Is there anything here about working across different teams? What about multiple Scrum teams? How do they work together? There's nothing here, right? The Scrum Guide does not cover that, because this is just the basic core Scrum Guide. If you want to be working across teams, you need Scrum of Scrum, or Scrum of Scrum of Scrum, and so forth. Or you can use some of the larger scale versions, right? Such as the Scaled Agile Framework SAFe, or another one called Less, which I quite like. Less is more. And you can use those, right? But if you're not doing core Scrum correctly, there's not much point doing the others. And again, you might say, well, it doesn't matter, I'm doing some of it, so that's better than nothing, isn't it? Well, that depends. It depends. Maybe it's worse than nothing. Maybe it's not better. Maybe what you're doing is you're reinforcing a whole bunch of processes, but you've forgotten the principles, right? And let's not forget that some of the core principles around Agile and Scrum and how it's evolved over the years are about empowering cross-functional teams. Is your team empowered? Also, a lot of this applies to teams that exist over a long period of time together and form a relationship as like a tribe, right? These people have loyalty to each other, and they're T-shaped. They support each other professionally and personally, right? It's like this team of, like, say, 7 or 8 people together, over years working together. Is that the way it is in the games team? Really? You might have, let's say, the lighting team, if you've got one. You might have a lighting team hanging out together. You might have the people who make clouds hanging out together, or the animation team hanging out together. But that's not a cross-discipline bunch of developers, is it? That's different. That's a core discipline, working on stuff. And a lot of what they're working on is a list of work that's been handed over to them to finish off and make better, to add their particular skill set to, right? It's not the discovery piece. It's not the experimentation piece. And if you go back to the manifesto and you go back to Scrum, Scrum is about solving complex problems. So what does the animation team have to say about that? A lot of what the animation team might have to do at the beginning is solve complex problems. They might need to understand the middleware they're using, understand their restrictions, understand the platforms, understand X, Y, and Z. But once that's done, they're not solving complex problems anymore. They're in full production mode, and that's a conveyor belt, right? And that's not Scrum. Scrum's not a conveyor belt. Scrum supports the iterative process of discovery and reflection and reflecting change and being able to adapt and being able to learn, right? You don't necessarily need to do any of that after a while, because a lot of that's finished, right? It's just done. So arguably, when you say in an interview, I know hybrid, you can't ever use pure agile, what you mean to say is depends, right? Depends on the game, depends upon where you are in the game, depends upon the phases, etc., because you can't use any of these things purely because you are not in pure software development. You're just not. And the other principles that you're supposed to be supporting is that the team's totally empowered to solve their own problems. Now, that's very unlikely in a lot of places, because a lot of places just simply say, these are the solutions to the problems, go and implement them, right? And it depends, right? But it's not the same world as pure software development. It's not the same level of weird, hidden engineering, crazy knowledge that you need to tap into, right? I mean, it could be if you've got a lot to do with, say, security and multiplayer and backend and whatever. There's a whole wealth of knowledge back there, right? Which is just scary as hell. You don't get anywhere near unless you're those specialists. In which case, Scrum might work from beginning to end, right? It might be brilliant, might be the perfect solution if there's always these complicated problems and complex problems to solve. But if your team's not truly empowered to solve problems, again, it's not agile. And also, one of the main principles is, do you release continuously? Are you doing that? Are you releasing continuously? Because that's really important. And if you say, well, we come together once every, say, 3 months and put everything together, or QA and core tech, they take it every month or so, or every 4 weeks. And if you say that kind of thing, you're not doing CI/CD, right? CI/CD requires modern software development and deployment principles in place, and well, not principles, sorry, but systems, right, in place. And a lot of the best leads on the teams will be the leads that come in and go, right, here's how we implement CI/CD. Let's get all this stuff set up. Let's go. And you need that, right? Because otherwise you can find yourself working on stuff that doesn't get back to where it should be for weeks. And when it does, you realize it's completely broken. But by then your team's working on something totally different, and it's a huge waste of time. So you must strive for CI/CD if you want to fight for agile team principles, right? And that's one of the principles that's really important to fight for, because it's not just about fighting for agile, it's about just fighting for what is absolutely essential. Now, doesn't matter how big or how small you are, this is just modern software development. it's just modern software development. There's no big mystery here. You can do this. You can make this happen. Maybe you won't be releasing every hour, but you can certainly make sure that you're putting in the tech investment, and that the teams can be confident that everything isn't going to fall to pieces in a week's time or in a month's time, right? And the worst I've seen here is, and it's not the worst because the people were at fault. It was the worst, but just because of the technology not being around. But the worst I've seen is where you have to do, say, builds for externals every couple of months, and that's when the hardening happens, and you put an entire week of hardening down because you don't have these CI/CD solutions supporting you. So you have to literally shut down the whole team and say, don't commit anything for a week, because that's when we're going to bring everything together, and QA is going to go through it, and Cortex is going to go through it, and we're going to find out if it all works. And then what happens is hundreds of bugs appear, and you have to tell everybody stop working. You weren't committing anyway, but just wait for the bugs and then fix them. And it's that still happens in places, and it doesn't have to be like that. So there's a lot going on here, and we've covered Agile, and we covered Scrum, and a little bit about CI/CD, and we're already like an over an hour in. Okay, so I guess I really need you to be sympathetic to the complexity here, and sympathetic to yourself, sympathetic to me too, because I'm not trying to have a go at anybody. What I'm trying to do is say, this is really hard, and what's made it really hard is that we as producers, particularly, we don't tend to get the training and support that we need. We tend to be sent on a course, told to learn Agile, told to come back and set up a Scrum team, and then told, like, put up a Kanban board, put up some cards, right? And then track the work on the team. And we're fully remote, so do it online. Yeah, you use something like Kanbanize, Jira, whatever, Trello, whatever, and just set up a Kanban board. Okay, right. So off you go, do Scrum, and then you just sit there going, doesn't really work, does it? But I've dropped half the ceremonies because no one wanted to do them, and because we're now remote, we haven't got the co-location best practice anymore. So even the stand-ups, half the people can't even turn up, so we have to do them asynchronously, and planning's down to an hour, and it tends to just be a bunch of people asking questions, and then we run out of time, and then I'm left on my own to do the rest of it, and like, we don't even do a review, we don't present it to anybody because no one really wants to see it, and actually, now we've moved into full production, the whole thing it's just a conveyor belt, so I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing. Now, this will do for part one, right? But in part two, we're going to carry on talking a little bit about alternatives to Agile. So we're going to look at Lean and Scrum Ban and some of this sort of thing, right? And also try and move from there into, well, what could work for you and what could make your life easier. But I think, there's a lot here, and I know a lot of what I'm saying is contentious. I'm trying not to make sweeping statements, but I have been around and I have talked to a lot of people, and they do share these kind of concerns with me. So, maybe this is useful to you. Maybe you go, oh God, I'm so happy that somebody's saying to me, you're not alone, right? But maybe you're saying, that's absolute bollocks, right? We've got Scrum working, we've got Safe working, we've got it just knocking, it's brilliant, we've never had any problems, we're using story points, it's all fantastic, we've got velocity tracked, bang, bang, bang. And if so, brilliant, right? Get in touch, let's chat. I'll ask you to do a little video with me, and we can just talk it through how you're doing it, because that's really interesting and great. And sometimes it will be like that, because again, it depends upon the team and it depends upon the phase, right? And a lot of this works much better with smaller teams, and particularly teams who have to solve complex problems, and that never goes away, okay? But a lot of the ceremonies here are really great ceremonies for supporting team building as well, and for supporting process improvement. Okay. And, you know, stand-ups, product backlog, the refinement process of the backlog, and also the roles like product owner, right? These are really, can be very powerful and very useful, but you're probably not doing it 100%. You're probably taking the bits which are brilliant for you and making them work, which again is great. Let's hear from you. Let me know. I'm not here to slag anyone off. What I'm here to do is to say, this can cause real heartache for people like us, producers and project managers and development directors and managers. It can cause real heartache for us because we try and fit these circles into these squares, and we assume that everybody else is doing it. Across the industry, they're all doing it, so we should be able to. What's wrong with us, right? Well, I can assure you they're not doing it. And the more senior you become, the more you realize that producers come in and take on a team or two, and they just do their version of Agile or Agile Scrum or Scrum Ban or whatever. They do their version of it. And what it is not is scientific. It is not based upon the project and program methodology science that is out there, right? What it is based upon is what they've been able to survive with, or what happened at their previous company. So again, that's fine if it works, but I think if you look at the state of game production and you look at how many games are cancelled, late, over budget, how much the crunch culture is still killing us after all these years, you would probably argue that it would be great if we could do this in a better way, and if we could standardize towards something that was better. So that's what I believe. So come at me, brewers, and I'm going to end this one as part one and see what you think.